Forget what anybody tells you. The true storyteller of Five Nights at Freddy's is a colorful, faceless bot known as Candy Cadet. The Lorekeeper, ever present and always cryptic, this rainbow robot is a vessel for delivering background for Fnaf, but he's not going to make it easy for you. Candy Cadet goes out of his way to make it as obscure as possible, in fact. But let's start with who and what Candy Cadet is. Candy Cadet is mostly an animatronic, though instead of mounted on a stage performing for families, he is a dispenser for candy who occasionally throws in a story.
I am a Candy Cadet. Come get your candy here. I have candy all day, every day. Candy, candy, candy. Return to Candy Cadet again, and maybe I will tell you a story.
Candy Cadet's amount of sentience is unknown. Like, we don't know if Candy Cadet feels or thinks, or just recites these stories. Either there's some amount of possession here, or someone purposefully made it to tell these stories. And considering the background behind Freddy's animatronics, and the men who were behind Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place, it could really be either. Though one of the most possible explanations comes from the lore vessels before him, the 8-bit minigames, and the haunted arcade machines. These games were the earliest ways of us getting direct lore delivered to us, save the newspapers in FNAF 1 and the phone guy. The idea that Candy Cadet 2 is just a haunted arcade machine actually makes a lot of sense considering that his minigame is his story. This is never confirmed. But due to the halting nature of how Candy Cadet talks and works, jury's out on how alive he truly is. Which brings us to Candy Cadet's introduction. Candy Cadet is a purchasable attraction for Pizza Simulator's Pizza Simulator. He can be bought for $310 and has a low to moderate entertainment and bonus revenue score and no liability. A good moderate attraction. But that's obviously not why you would buy Candy Cadet. You buy Candy Cadet for candy, and maybe a story. And that's what you get. Testing the bot allows you to listen to one of his 3 stories. We'll go through each of them. But I should add that Candy Cadet doesn't always give you a story. I mistakenly misremembered that he did. But then when I went back to get footage, it took me 5 tries to get a story. And then after 2 more tries, I got the same story. So that explains the maybe a story thing. The first one being the Kind Man story.
Now I will tell you a story. A story about a kind man who would visit 5 orphans and bring them toys and gladness. The man lived alone, and lived in fear that someone might break into the house of one of the 5 children, so he adopted all 5, and brought them together in one place, in his own home. He promised them to never leave them, and they promised to always come home, and never stay out too late. He left one day to buy food, his heart being filled with gladness, but returned to find that the burglar had chosen his home, and killed all 5 of the children. The man could only afford one coffin, so he stitched the 5 bodies together to make one, and buried the child. That night, there was a knock at the door.
So what does this story mean? It's a little perplexing. The Kind Man seems to be Henry, one of the owners of Freddy's alongside William, and who is a major character in this game, though is likely not encountered or known about until after hearing this story. In the books, Henry is alluded to have been a fatherly figure at some point, where in the games his entire personality is just scorned father, so this would make the most sense. What doesn't is what comes next. He adopts 5 children. They are murdered. He then pieces them back together. Likely the home he adopts them into is his home away from home, the diner. But Henry wasn't the one to piece the broken children back together. The one who did that was William, wasn't he? Or perhaps the puppet if you count putting the bodies in the suits as putting them back together, but considering William's perchance for building animatronics and his elaborate plans, and innard, I think this relates to him. Indeed, ignoring the Kind Man comment, this story actually sounds like it's explaining what happened between FNAF 3 and Pizzeria Simulator. Let me explain. So in FNAF 3, the animatronics are shown being broken up by the Purple Man before he becomes Springtrap. These 4, 5 if you count Golden Freddy, children are left in pieces. While never anywhere stated in the games, in the books it says that these parts were then formed into an amalgam by William. In the games, well, it doesn't directly say. Molten Freddy matches the amalgam in the books and seems to be the candidate in his cut description, but it is never clarified that he is the original band. And considering that he was also Funtime Freddy and that band, yeah, that would be confusing. So what does this story mean? Well, I still think it involves those busted animatronics and the children's souls. But whether it was William who put them back together, like in the books, or Henry, the kind man, or Michael, the kind man who isn't a self-centered titmouse, is unclear. As we will see as we continue to look through these Candy Cadet stories, they tend to explain the lore but are so up to interpretation that often you can find more than one meaning in them. They don't so much explain the lore as give an outline of certain events. And maybe you get a story? That maybe's the key here. Let's move on to story 2, The Kitten and the Snake.
Now I will tell you a story about a little boy. He had a red snake that he kept in a metal cage, whose hunger could not be satisfied. One day, the boy found 5 baby kittens outside his house. He brought them inside and kept them in a shoebox. He knew that the snake might kill them, but could not bring himself to get rid of the snake. He knew that if he chose one kitten to feed to the snake, it might be satisfied, but he could not choose. So, he went to bed, leaving the cage open. The snake went to the shoebox, chose a kitten at random, and ate it. After 5 nights had gone by, the boy was full of regret, and cut snake open. He pieced the remains together, and put the kitten back into the shoebox.
While the first story seemed a little more complicated to work out, this one's conundrum is that there is a very forthright, obvious take, and then there's a vague one that's really stretching it that I only thought of right now because I was overanalyzing things. So the most obvious telling of the story is that it's just a rephrasing of the first one, that William offed 5 children and that someone put them back together. If the boy's a stand-in for Henry, it would kind of match how his daughter was killed and he just kind of didn't do anything for years. But another possibility that could be very likely is that the boy is Michael, that the red snake is still William. We know Michael must have been somewhat aware of what his father was doing, and it could be that the story is a reflection of his own guilt for basically standing there and letting his father continue to hop from business to business, like Mike himself was speculated to. We know Michael had a dangerous relationship with William. When William told Michael that Elizabeth was in Afton Robotics, Michael pretty much went there with some knowledge of what was going on, likely somewhat ignorant to the plan of him getting sacrificed to free Baby, and he suffered for it. Michael left the cage open for Will. Or it could also be another Henry take, that too. The final story is about a young woman in a room.
Now I will tell you a story about a young woman who was sealed in a small room. In the room was a furnace, and 5 keys. She was told that each of the 5 keys would unlock one of 5 doors outside her room. Inside each room was a child that she could take with her as she fled the building. But she was only allowed to leave her own room with 1 key, not all 5. Desperate to find a way to save all 5 children, the woman melted the 5 keys together in the furnace to create a single key, hoping it would unlock all 5 doors. Of course, it did not work that way. Now her key opened none of the doors. Rather than leaving her room with a key to 1 life, she had taken with her the key to 5 deaths.
So I assume this is about Charlie in the puppet. But that is only because she is the only female character for this role. The most literal take would be that Charlie knew that she could move on and take one of the kids with her and they would be free, but she didn't. And because of that, now they're all stuck in limbo. But that kind of doesn't make sense in a way. Maybe it could be a metaphor for how putting the children in the bodies, she thought she was giving them eternal life, but instead of freeing them from death, she was trapping them in cages. That leaves the key to one of them being up in the air, but you can't be too sure how much of what's being said here is literal. I don't think that there was literally a kitten in the second story, so maybe the key is not a literal single way out, but the concept of letting go. So if I am correct on these assumptions, that would mean Candy Cadet stories are about the 3 primary protagonists in Pizzeria Simulator, and while it's kept vague, this could check out. After all, it wouldn't make sense to have 2 semi-different stories be about Henry alone, and it wouldn't make sense to have a story about someone outside of this focused upon cast. But again, this isn't confirmed, and I'm not even 100% sure on this. These are just my best guesses, but I'm willing to say that they may be wrong. So that was the original batch of Candy Cadet stories. Candy Cadet, like the other animatronics, burned in the Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Place fire, but his body did survive. But before we get to that, let's go to his return in Ultimate Custom Night. Candy Cadet sits in the default office where he occasionally twitches or speaks up, saying lines from his old stories.
Now I will tell you a story. He pieced the remains together. He promised them to never leave them. But he could not choose.
He's not one of the animatronics we go up against and is otherwise just a background prop. The next real appearance of Candy Cadet, outside of merch, was surprisingly rather recently, when he returned in ruin. Abandoned in the sunken pizzeria beneath the Pizzaplex, assumedly left where he remained after the fire, Candy Cadet is roughed up and dirty, rusty, missing part of his arm and antenna, but still functional. Finding tokens around the room allows you to listen to yet another story. Also, someone gift-wrapped all the tokens, that was very nice of them.
I am a Candy Cadet. Come get your candy here. I have candy all day, every day. Candy. Now I will tell you a story about a mother and a little boy who lived alone in a cabin in the dark woods. There was a monster in the woods, but the mother caught it and kept it locked in the basement. The monster always made scary noises at night, but the mother would tell the boy not to worry because it could never get out. Then she would sing the boy a lullaby to sleep. One day, the monster stopped growling and instead listened and learned the lullaby. The next day when mother went out to find food, the monster sang the lullaby from the basement. The little boy heard the lullaby and opened the door.
This story is pretty clearly a reference to Gregory and Vanessa and an encounter with the Mimic, the true villain behind Ruin who is revealed shortly after running into Candy Cadet. In fact, Candy Cadet's story is basically directly foreshadowing Mimic. Considering that Gregory is shown leaving the Pizzaplex with Vanessa in Security Breach's Saving Vanny ending, and is hinted to still be with her in Ruin's secret ending, and the fact that in the Security Breach ending where he runs away from the Pizzaplex he's sleeping on the streets, I think it's pretty likely that Vanessa might have taken Gregory in after Security Breach, explaining the mother and little boy reference. The monster that's locked in the basement learns to mimic the mother's voice. This is quite clearly the Mimic. My take is this. I believe the story might be reflecting on an event that happened before Ruin and after Security Breach, and might answer how Gregory first saw the Mimic and how the Mimic began to mimic Gregory. Vanessa at some point locked the Mimic away and warned Gregory to never go down into the basement of the Pizzaplex, or wherever she originally had it locked up. How did Vanessa know about the Mimic? Well, if he is burn-trapped, then that. If he's not, well, we know Vanny was running around down in the buried pizzeria, so likely she would have seen him regardless. Either way, she contained him, and at some point mimicked Vanessa's voice to lure Gregory to him. From the story and the context surrounding the games, this is likely what happened next. Gregory inadvertently freed Mimic. Vanessa came and got involved in time to help Gregory, or Gregory was able to escape Mimic some other way. Maybe Glamrock Freddy was involved. This encounter gave Mimic enough time with Gregory to learn to copy him, and was how he got the Freddy radio. Vanessa then sealed Mimic away and either upgraded or built the security system to keep him locked up. But Mimic was able to use his most valuable tool, Gregory's voice, to lure Cassie to the Pizzaplex to try the same method twice. That would actually explain some of what happened in the gap between Security Breach and Ruin, and would also explain, well, how Mimic got to the point of mimicking Gregory. So, that's my best bet. That is the only story from Candy Cadet in that game. The most recent appearance of Candy Cadet was in Help Wanted 2. 2 back-to-back appearances. Candy Cadet fans are eating good tonight. Here he is seated in this flip-flop alternate world where you remove the mask and you see him, being the inside of the sunken pizzeria, and in the same dilapidated state as in Ruin. Collecting tokens through the game allows you to hear his newest story, and this one is a doozy.
Come get your candy here. Candy, candy, candy. Now let me tell you a story about a young woman who, when she was little, was led into a dark forest by a witch, and almost eaten. She had fallen for the friendly voice without discernment, and was led astray. She had escaped before being thrown into the oven, but would have a scar for the rest of her life. When she had grown, she sought revenge on the witch, and entered the forest again willingly, this time with the confidence of age and experience. She was greeted at the mouth of the forest by a young boy who offered to help guide her through the darkness. She welcomed the help, and followed the young boy over the river, through the jagged trees, and toward a small house. "Come," the boy said. "Rest here before killing the witch." The young woman was tired, and would kill the witch in the morning. She followed the boy into the house. The oven door closed. The witch would finally have her meal.
I think the parallels in the story are pretty obvious. Someone pretending to be a boy to lure a little girl in, or a young woman in, a dangerous place, a witch, yeah, and considering that this happens before or perhaps during Ruin makes it kinda clear what the story is about. Doesn't it? The thing about the story is, well, it's unclear who it's about. It reads like it's about Cassie, yes, but the tail end reads like it could be about Vanessa. The witch's mimic, of course. But what if it's Vanny? Or Glitch Trap? The young woman is either Vanessa post-security breach or Cassie post-ruin. But that wouldn't make sense with Vanessa growing up. She didn't really grow up between the two games. And the post-ruin stuff is especially weird because, as revealed in Help Wanted 2's ending, this happened before Ruin, which would mean that Candy Cadet would have had to be seen quite a ways into the future. So what gives? Well, then it must be Vanessa. But when on earth was Vanessa lured down into the basement of Freddy's and then lured again? Was it not the basement? Was it just luring in the game? It could be luring in the game, that would make sense. But then again, Vanessa wasn't young at that point. Or are they talking about her growing up later? Well, it must be another Kitten thing. She was just lured in a broader sense, perhaps. It's both. It's neither. It's too vague to tell, really. Yes, no, maybe, I don't know. This is one of those cases where it's hard to tell if this is actually telling us story clues or if it's foreshadowing. Is it Vanessa's secret past or Cassie's future? And most importantly, it doesn't matter. Like the Gregory story in Ruin explained a way more interesting story than we actually saw, this explains a story that might have been neat but isn't really here. In fact, that kinda goes for all of Candy Cadet's stories. There are vague tidbits of what could be lore delivered so loosely that it's hard to absorb their meaning, and even when we do, it's not the same as seeing it happen, you know? Think back to each story and what I said I thought happened. The way I explained them might have given you the impression that these are concise stories, that the Candy Cadet is giving important pieces of the lore. But there's only one problem. They aren't real. The Pizzeria Simulator stories aren't about Henry, Michael, and the puppet. The Ruin story wasn't really about Gregory and Vanessa. Those were just my guesses. I put a story atop the Candy Cadet story to explain it in a way that I would understand. But left alone, that meaning I gave it doesn't really exist. Do you think that's what happened? Do you think something else happened? Well, we're both right and wrong because there's no clear answer. That's the biggest problem with Candy Cadet. He is the ultimate storyteller, telling us stories about a story that we're not seeing. He's basically exposition hidden behind a riddle, built on a wibbly-wobbly foundation that someone else might easily confuse the details. A dangerous mix when added to important exposition and patching pieces to the story. The fact that Candy Cadet is being used to help answer the voids in the story instead of as being a side character giving extra details is the problem. He is, by design, built for extra details. But his details are some of the only answers we get in Fnaf's storyline, and they're as clear as a pollen-covered windshield covered in cat paw prints. Trust me, I know. Another problem is having it set up like this encourages us to read too deeply into these stories, and that it might actually be a lot more direct than we're leaving it to be. And then the loose narratives he weaves are suddenly confusing because do they mean this or do they mean that? Is this about Henry or William? Is this also about Henry or William? Is Michael involved? Candy Cadet should be a fun aside, but the circumstances he's been dropped into make him more valuable than he is. The problem surrounds Candy Cadet, but it's not Candy Cadet's problem. It's the stories. Because let's be frank, information on Michael Afton, Henry, Charlie, on how Gregory might have met Mimic, and possibly Cassie's upcoming survival or Vanessa's survival post-security breach, these are important details. They shouldn't have been hidden exclusively behind a side character's Dr. Seuss baloney. That's not to say I don't like Candy Cadet, don't get me wrong, I like Candy Cadet. I just mean that Candy Cadet should be a sweet treat on the side, not a candy crutch. Candy Cadet should be supplying us with extra details, not the only details. But this isn't anything I haven't said before. I think Candy Cadet's charred corpse being dragged around and poked and prodded to spill its knowledge speaks for itself. But it is the final Candy Cadet story that reveals the true nature of Candy Cadet.
Now I will tell you a story about a family that missed the most important opportunity in their lives. It was a limited-time offer that included a family-style pizza with all their favorite toppings. It also came with a side of fries, mozzarella sticks, extra-large soft drinks, and a toy surprise. It was only $49.99 while supplies lasted. They did not purchase the food and they all died.
He's a sellout. We all believed he was the soothsayer of Freddy's, but Fazbear Entertainment bought him out. He's on commission. He gets a shiny nickel whenever you enter his coupon code, Candy Candy Candy, at the checkout for orders of $19.87 or more. Can we trust any of the stories post Pizzeria Simulator? Or even still, what if there was never a Candy Cadet? What if he was just added in by the rogue indie developer who created the Fnaf games in-universe in the later Fnaf games? A vessel to tease truths that couldn't be revealed in the actual game, or else the evil Fazbear Company would cause the chip in his brain to detonate. Which is why Candy Cadet is so unreliable. He must be vague. Or else. Nah. Candy Cadet is probably just a mouthpiece to hint the lore that we don't see. With mixed success, but he gets the job done. So that's the story and stories of the Candy Cadet. Will we see him again? Considering he was in the last two games, there's a pretty good chance we will. I wouldn't be shocked if he showed up in the next mainline game, honestly. Probably with the same shtick, offering up lore clues in exchange for you signing up for his mailing list or something along those lines. Hopefully he'll be a little cleaned up because I don't think that body's gonna last much longer unless he gets a spray down. Candy Cadet is a peculiar case because what seemed to be a one-and-done gimmick demoted to cameo has come back as a major piece of the ongoing lore. But whether or not we'll figure out the true soul driving Candy Cadet is unclear. Whether he himself is more important to the greater lore other than being the storyteller is also unclear. Whether his stories actually mean anything is also unclear. There's a lot of unsureness surrounding this bot. When it comes to his storytelling, we're about as blind as he is. But he was a nice distraction for a while, and I suppose a little hinting is better than nothing, am I right? Anyway, thank you for watching.